Lecture 21, this is called the 20th century, a new phase. A theme to keep in mind here as we talk about this time period is, as a world historian, can we maintain contact with these earlier patterns that we've been discussing throughout the class? Some challenges for us. The 20th century is a time of, in the words of one historian, a social catastrophe. How do we deal with this? World wars, ethnic cleansing, genocide. These things are going to be discussed over the next few lectures. Another challenge, Western influence remains strong, but it's not contested around the world. Another, modernization continues at its own pace in different regions. We've already seen how the world does not move at the same pace. Two key issues. We don't know the end of the story, so it's hard to know just how these patterns are going to develop. Another issue, we still live with the consequences of the past century. Of course, we had the world wars of 1914 to 1945, we had the Great Depression, a number of significant revolutions. We had the Cold War from 1945 to 1990. We had the emergence of the United States as the only world superpower. These 30, 40-year chunks of time are not really sufficient for a world historian. It doesn't allow us to really view long-term developing patterns, does it? The world wars signaled a decline of European influence. The Cold War framework has crumbled as well. The nuclear arms race, the bipolar world. By bipolar, we mean one axis revolving around the communist world and the other axis revolving around the capitalist world. The competition between capitalism and communism, that's finished. Are there new patterns and new themes that we can identify? How long does the long 19th century last? Is it over? Are we still living with the consequences of it? Let's look at some big patterns here socially. I think we should point out that aristocracy and its power is now mostly gone, except for ceremonial purposes. The aristocracy, the traditional ruling class, is now replaced by a rising class of professionals in government, business, media, academia. We live increasingly in an urban as opposed to an agricultural world. Industry over farming. The 20th century political regimes go from monarchies to republics. But of course we also see the rise of authoritarian regimes in the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, and we see the rise of communist systems as well. Let's stick with this, the big patterns where we discuss social issues. Gender relationships and gendered expectations are obviously changing as well. The traditional patriarchy is increasingly replaced by reforms that try to provide equal rights for women, among others. Clearly, this change is not worldwide, nor is it complete by any means. We have cultural changes, obviously, taking root in the 20th century. Communism, nationalism, consumerism, the faith and science. But these have not replaced the traditional world religions. No new and obvious pattern of faith or belief has emerged from the chaos of the 20th century. Another long-running theme here is the decline of the West. It's a relative decline. It's not absolute. The United States remains the world's most powerful country. The loss of colonies by the great powers, this has not crippled European culture or European economies. How do we deal with World War I and World War II? Do we look at this as an ongoing civil war in the West? The West is no longer simply able to impose its will on the rest of the world. Western military dominance no longer decisive. Why? Well, we have the rise of a number of factors that limit Western power. Guerrilla warfare is one that comes to mind immediately. Remember Mao Zedong's famous quote, The gorilla must move among the people as a fish swims in the sea. Guerrilla warfare makes it difficult for Western armies to pick out the enemy. If the enemy would dress appropriately so we would know he's the enemy, then Western armies are generally very effective at killing. But when the enemy and the civilians look the same, then there's a certain iron logic here that to win, you have to kill everybody. And of course, Western armies are not prepared to do that either. Colonial resistance in urban areas is difficult for the West to contend with. Think of Algeria, think of Iraq. This urban fighting is very difficult because, again, you're mixing in civilians with enemy combatants. Western military power is often nullified by these factors. Let's face it, what does victory in Afghanistan or Iraq look like? The average American would have an extremely difficult time answering that question. Western military power is now successfully contested. Again, Vietnam, with the withdrawal of the United States, Afghanistan, more recently, again, with the ongoing withdrawal of U.S. forces. Post-World War II, decolonization takes place in this Cold War context of a competition between the Soviet Union and its allies and the United States and its allies. The Western powers now impose a less formal influence in the world. I've heard some people refer to it as a soft empire. Western power is now often exercised through consumerism and through cultural artifacts, films, music, clothing, celebrity. In fact, cultural imperialism has become a topic among historians, where we look at the influence of Hollywood movies, hip-hop, DVDs, clothing, McDonald's, Levi's, etc., a softer empire. Some new themes that we need to at least keep in mind. Will the East rise as the West declines? Will a new dominant historical actor appear? How about Islam? Has Islam awakened from a long slumber? And now we're all going to have to deal with this awakening for the next century. Think of the conquest of outer space. This has had a dramatic scientific and technological impact. It does not seem to have had a deep impact on society as yet. Think of how we wage war today, total war, where the state has access to propaganda, great economic resources, atomic weapons, smart weapons, and more recently, of course, if you watch the news, you'll see that we have been decapitating ISIS and Al-Qaeda with drones in the Middle East. This is a new and dangerous time to be alive. Global population increase, well, from 2 to 6 billion over the past century. New patterns of immigration with this vast population from Latin America, Africa, Asia, to Western Europe, Canada, Australia, the United States, Japan. Increasingly heterogeneous populations, increasingly sophisticated cosmopolitan populations. Now, will this hinder old-fashioned nationalism, this mixing of all these different types of people? What about global environmental change? This has become a highly politicized topic. We're talking here mainly about the melting of glaciers and the ice caps, rising sea levels. A potential for future conflict here, of course, is over water rights. Environmental change could potentially impact agriculture and how to feed an ever-growing population. India and China are now rapidly moving into the consumer culture, long enjoyed by the West. This is going to put increasing demands on resources, on food, water, consumer goods, energy resources. Of course, increasing demand usually means prices go up, creates scarcity. These are long-term problems that we're going to have to grapple with as a species. Technology, well, we have an explosion in communication and transportation technology. This creates a shrinking world. The Earth is much smaller today than it was 100 years ago. is smaller than it was 30 years ago. With radio, television, the internet, air travel, species are now being delivered via ship and planes to new areas where they often destroy the indigenous life forms. This is sometimes referred to as the Anthropocene extinction event, man-made and usually inadvertent, whereby species hitch rides on our ships and planes and go to places where they don't belong, creating havoc in that environment. Let's draw some conclusions here on this 20th century. Human brutality. We seem to have crossed the line in the 20th century so that civilians become targets just as much as enemy combatants. We have large-scale slaughter of select peoples in the 20th century. Think of the Turks and the genocide against the Armenians in the First World War. Stalin, the collectivization of agriculture in Ukraine in the early 30s. I still haven't seen a final figure. Seems like the last one I saw was 7 to 10 million people starved to death in the collectivization of agriculture. Think about the Japanese rape of Nanking in 1937, where the Japanese army loses its mind and acts in the most bestial fashion. Think of Stalin and the Polish officer corps, the slaughter at Katyn in 1940. Hitler and the Holocaust in the 1940s. Think about Rwanda, the Hutus and the slaughter of the Tutsis in 1994. The Bosnian Muslims and the Yugoslav Civil War in the mid-90s. The Sudanese Civil War that continues today. Will this sort of large-scale destruction of the historical other, will it continue? Think about the impact of technology here in conclusion. I mentioned a moment ago we have a shrinking planet due to communications and transportation. This increasingly mixes people together. They begin to tolerate differences. Is this going to increase or lessen nationalism? Is it going to enhance chances for war or lessen chances for war as globalization continues? And we may, in time, in distant future, form a truly global society. Although, as you can see from our recent election, this is highly contested. And finally, impact of medicine. Increasingly effective medical regimes will extend human life. Much larger populations combined with larger lifespans, or longer lifespans, will put great pressure on the Earth's resources. Will this competition for scarce resources provoke war or encourage cooperation? Big questions. Thank you for your attention.